From safari adventures and travel updates to conservation and humanitarian stories, this is Africa Revealed, bringing you the heart and soul of East Africa. Now, here's your host, Dr. Matt Jensen.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I am glad you're joining us once again for another segment of Africa Revealed with your host, myself, Dr. Matt Jensen. I'm thrilled to be sharing my thoughts about everything Africa, specifically about African safaris and about the great work that we're doing through our nonprofit in the rural areas of Africa. And I'm particularly excited about today's episode because today's episode is useful and beneficial to so many people. Even if you're thinking about an African safari, you'll want to hear about this episode. If you're booked on a safari, you're probably going to get some good information. And even if you're not quite sure, you just want to hear about what life is like on a safari or the things you need to think about, then this is a great episode because today we're going to reveal the 5 secrets or the 5 things that everyone should know when planning an African safari. So first of all, what is an African safari? Is it just going to like a great big outdoor zoo? Let me tell you. An African safari is nothing like anything you've experienced because there's so much about going on an African safari that is so unique and different than any other type of adventure that you'll have anywhere else in the world. If you watched my podcast from the beginning, in the first episode, I introduced a little bit about one of the companies that I'm associated with, I helped found, Tapestry of Africa, and how we refer to a safari as a big, beautiful artwork or a tapestry of woven threads and patterns and shapes and colors. And there are so many different experiences that represent individual patterns, individual shapes, or make up the many threads of a beautiful African tapestry. And because of that, yes, the main event on an African safari, of course, is the animals. But I tell people all the time, you can see the animals in a zoo. You can go to the biggest zoos or the outdoor wildlife parks here in the U.S. and have an amazing experience seeing the wildlife. But what is it about seeing them in Africa? Well, it's seeing that wildlife in its own natural, rugged, untamed environment. You couple that with the people and the cultures and the beautiful landscapes, and there's nothing like it in the world of seeing what a safari is like in Africa. So today we're going to talk about the 5 things that everybody should know when you're thinking about or when it's time to book your African safari. And we're going to go back to the basics. We're going to talk about the where should you go on safari. We're going to talk about when you should go on safari, who you should go on safari with, choosing a safari operator, and what do you need to do when you're planning or what you need to do before you go. And on the last segment, I'm saving it for the last because I want you to stay with me. I'm going to reveal some pro tips and pearls of wisdom of things that can save you problems and help to get you where you want to go when you want to go on your safari with the least amount of headaches and problems. So here we go. Let's start with the first segment. We're going to talk about where should you go on safari? Well, that question can be a little difficult to answer, but I'm still going to provide you some great answers. Lots of sub-Saharan Africa, that's below the deserts, Central and Southern Africa, are great areas that have lots of wildlife, beautiful landscapes for you to see. However, some particular countries and areas are a little bit more developed and ready to bring you on safari. Now, when I say developed, don't mistake what I'm saying. It doesn't mean we're going to take you to a suburban area where it's just a zoo in Africa. No, what I mean by that is that the countries, the governments, and the regions have welcomed travel and tourism into those safari environments in a way that it's easier to fly, to arrive from other developed countries too. There's a greater variety of lodges and camps, and the safari trails are a little bit more common and easier to get around. The environments, the national parks, the reserves are still pristine and amazing to see even though these areas are more welcoming to safari travelers. There's also areas that are not as developed. Some of you are looking for a little bit more of an exclusive environment. Of course, keep in mind, the less traveled, the more exclusive, the higher the cost. But let's talk about some of the more common areas that you might want to consider for your first safari and that we highly recommend if it's your first trip to Africa. The first and most obvious conclusion is East Africa. Now, the safari countries in East Africa are actually considered the safari capital. And I'm talking about Kenya, Tanzania, and then we're also going to get into other East African countries like Uganda and Rwanda. When you talk about Uganda, you're usually associating Uganda with primates, gorilla trekking, chimpanzee trekking. After all, Uganda is home to the primate capital of the world, Kibale National Park, also the mountain gorilla trekking in the Bwindi region. And so if you're going to go on safari in Uganda, you want to include, or you should focus it on those primate tracking regions. You can also see primates in Congo, in Rwanda, but my recommendation is Uganda. Now, the most popular places for first-time safari goers in East Africa is Kenya and Tanzania, the home of the Great Rift Valley. Now, I could go on a whole nother episode about why the Great Rift Valley has brought a huge variety in his home to the Big Five, and amazing species of animals that everybody wants to see. The elephants, the giraffes, of course, the big cats, the leopards, the lions, and the cheetahs. But there's all kinds of gazelles and antelopes and the bird life. I'm not a birder, but let me tell you, I'm becoming one because the bird life in the Great Rift Valley in the areas of Kenya and Tanzania are phenomenal. And there's a great safari circuit that our companies work that go from Kenya to Tanzania and back. You hit places like the Masai Mara, the Serengeti, the home of the Big Five. I'm not going to tell you what the Big Five, because I want you to go look at it, but we'll talk about the Big Five in another episode. But you're going to have all kinds of experiences to see these animals in different environments, different seasons. And so East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, is probably responsible for probably 70% or more of all safaris, and overwhelmingly it's the best place to go for your first safari, because in Kenya and Tanzania you'll also see a variety of costs. You don't have to spend $10,000 to go on a 1 week or 10-day safari, but you can go primitive or more budget safari experiences in. Yes, you can go camping in air mattresses. You can do that. But if you just want a basic safari lodge with a bed and some food to eat, you don't have to spend a lot of money. But most people go in that mid-range luxury where they want to have some degree of comfort and beauty around them. But Kenya and Tanzania offer a huge variety of budgets. You could go for a 1 week safari anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 per person, all the way up to something more luxury of $15,000 even to $20,000 per person for a 7 to 10-day safari. But it's the wildlife, the landscapes, the culture and people, the Maasai people, that bring East Africa to the forefront of popularity when it comes to seeing great varieties of places to see. And so East Africa is probably where you should start looking to take your first safari. Other places that I recommend: Botswana, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is home to the beautiful Victoria Falls, right? The most beautiful, rugged canyon of literally millions of gallons of sheets of water going on continuously. And it's right next door to the border of Zimbabwe and Botswana. Chobe National Park is one of the most amazing parks you can see. And of course, we could go on about the Okavango Delta and the Kauai Concession and Mon and so many places. These can get a little bit higher in cost. And so typically a second or third safari is a great time to consider Zimbabwe and Botswana. And of course, there's Kruger National Park in South Africa. Zimbabwe, Botswana, Malawi, Zambia, Namibia, South Africa, those all make up the countries of the southern region of Africa. But we recommend that you look at Kenya, Tanzania, and even Uganda if you want to go for a little bit longer for your first safari to get the maximum and amazing safari and wildlife experiences on most likely a budget, that you can probably live with when it comes to your first safari. Okay, let's move on to number 2. When should you go on safari? Now, this is not a cliche, and I mean it with all my heart. There is not a bad time of year to go on safari, especially to East Africa. Why is it? Well, the animals don't take vacation. The animals don't migrate. Now, yes, we've talked about the great migration and the wildebeest, and that's one exception that we can talk about. But guess what? There's wildebeest almost everywhere in East Africa throughout the year. Not all the wildebeest migrate, but of course, most of them do. But what I mean is the rhinos and the lions and all the animals that you want to see in the wild, they don't take long breaks. They don't come to America. They don't go to the UK. They're still there. Now, there are rainy seasons, green seasons, colder seasons, and warmer seasons. So let me go through each season so you can decide when you think the best time for you to go on safari is. First of all, let's talk about the high season. High season is almost the same everywhere in the world. It's from about the end of June to about the end of September or into October. Many reasons for this. We're just coming out of the colder season. Remember, East Africa and much of South Africa nations are below the equator, so the seasons are slightly swapped, where wintertime is in our summertime in the US or north of the equator and vice versa. But remember, these countries that are near the equator, they don't have these huge swings in temperature. You're not going to go in the winter and find snow in East Africa, and you're not going to be at 112 like in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live when I'm not in Africa during the summer months. And so the high season is the time when kids are out of school. People associate vacations with the summer months, but of course, also, East Africa is home to the great migration during the high season months. So between all those factors and you add in the great wildebeest migration, July through September are the high season months. The weather is good, still can be a little chillier, but you're going to see the great migration. It's also the dry season. So you're going to see a lot of animals looking. They're out and about more looking for those elusive areas of green vegetation to feed on. And so you also are going to have, when you go in the high season, unfortunately, you're going to be around larger crowds of people. Costs are at the highest for lodges, camps, park entries, vehicles, gas, fuel. All these things go up in cost during the high season. What about mid-season? Well, the mid-seasons, and again, you can go to many different websites and you'll get different opinions. So I'm giving you roundabout months, but the mid-season can be anywhere from end of October through till the holidays, so about mid-December. Then again, after the holidays from January till about March. I love the mid-seasons because the weather is wonderful. You don't have the extremely hot or extremely cold. And again, I'm talking about small fluctuations, but the costs are a little bit lower and the crowds are lower. And guess what? The animals are still there. And here's another quick little bit of information. The great wildebeest migration might not be going on at the border areas and the Mara River areas of eastern Tanzania and western Masai Mara of Kenya, but the winter great migration is happening January through March in the Ndutu or southern Serengeti region. So you can still go in the lower cost, or I should say the mid season or the off season, and still have some great migration action. But in Kenya and other areas away, the cost goes lower. So if you are flexible with the time that you're going to go on safari, consider the mid season for the weather, for the cost, and for lower crowds. All right, what about the final seasons? There is the green season, the wet season, or the low season. And typically those are April to May. April is typically a wetter month, but you still have lots of periods of time during the day where you will have dry season. The costs are the lowest in April and May. So if you want the bare bones lowest cost, I would consider early April or late May. You still might have a rainy day or two, but the animals are still around and you can still have an amazing experience. I've been in the low season, the green season, many times, and there's lots of sunny days, lots of animals. So if cost is your primary objective, then consider April, and May. So I hope that gives you a good idea of when you can go on safari and what you can expect for the different seasons. Okay, that brings me to the third part of our episode, and that's what do I need to do, or what's required, or what do I need to know if I want to go on safari? So you are right to ask that question. There's many different things that make an African safari unique, and that is the fact that you need to think about travel health, immunizations, vaccinations, passport, visas. You're right. So let's quickly go through that list. First of all, most people in most developed countries do need a tourist visa in most countries. There's a few differences, like Botswana and Zimbabwe allows you to get a visa on arrival. So does Tanzania. But Kenya, Uganda, and many other countries do require a tourist visa before you go. In most cases, they have streamlined the process. It's quicker and easier to get these visas online. But when you book your safari, one question to ask is, what are the visa requirements and when do I need to get them? Second thing you need to consider is your travel health and vaccinations. In most areas of East Africa or Southern Africa, yellow fever is the number one required or strongly recommended vaccination to get. There is still yellow fever in different parts of Africa. Now, some countries do say that you don't need a yellow fever vaccine if you're traveling directly from a country where it's not endemic. However, that seems to be quite a little bit of a caveat. I tell people, and again, this is not medical advice. I'm just telling you what the customs and general recommendations are by government and other travel related health resources recommend. And that's it. If you can, you're under the age of 60, over the age of 60, it might not be a good idea. Just plan on getting the yellow fever vaccine. Why worry? Another one to consider is the typhoid vaccine. And by the way, yellow fever, you get it once, good for the rest of your life. Typhoid, last I checked, is good for about 10 years. Not a bad one to get. Of course, your childhood vaccinations, hepatitis A, B, and of course, MMR and these other things. Obviously, you want to have your other vaccinations. Other ones they're going to ask you about are rabies and COVID. And when you go to a travel health clinic, obviously they're going to recommend a lot of things to cover themselves, but do your homework, do your research. The other thing that you're going to want is definitely some anti-malaria medication. Malaria is common throughout East Africa, and in developed countries, we don't get it much. So if you get malaria, you could have quite an illness. But if you take anti-malaria medications as recommended, you're going to have a good experience. I've never had malaria. None of my travelers on our safaris have had it, but those are typically the vaccinations you want to think about. And of course, you're going to want to bring your regular medications with you, along with your anti-malaria medications. Other things, when you're there, just make sure you're being well aware that you're washing your hands, that you're not using tap water to brush your teeth. These basic kind of things that will keep you healthy. Your passport typically needs to be valid for 6 months or longer after you arrive. So check your passport validity and expiration dates to make sure that you have that in order. Travel insurance. Now, there's two kinds of travel insurance, and we talk about this on a future episode, but you want to make sure you have medical insurance while you are on safari. Heaven forbid something happen, an accident, an illness where you do need medical care. Those can kind of pile up awful quick. So make sure that you have some type of traveler's medical insurance. The other kind of traveler's insurance is trip cancellation or trip insurance. That's if something happens before you want to make sure you're covered to recoup non-refundable costs. Of course, baggage restrictions, luggage allowances, you need to check with your airlines to make sure that you understand. The good news, most safari lodges and camps offer laundry services. They're either free or a smaller fee. You want to make sure that you're not overpacking. It is third world countries. It's not a good idea to get your bags lost, but definitely check with your airlines and your safari company to make sure that you're aware of what you're allowed to bring with you. Okay, I think we've talked a lot about the what you need to know in order to go on safari. Now, another great thing is number 4, who are you going on safari with? Now, obviously, I'm a little bit biased with our safari companies. However, this episode and this podcast is for everybody and anybody. So let me give you a few tips about who to look for and what to look for in a safari company. First of all, you already know it. Where do you start? Reviews. Go to the online reviews, read some of the negative reviews, because I will be honest, some negative reviews are extremely not very valid. They might be angry about something that's very unique to their experience and not representing the company as a whole. But read the negatives and see if it's something that's going to bother you or not. I tell people, don't let a negative review or two really detract you from a safari company, but read what they're doing right and what's important to you. Does this company communicate clearly and often? After all, you're going to need a lot of help. You're going to have a lot of questions that need to be answered. Does the company communicate clearly? Of course, the reviews I just mentioned. What are other travelers' experiences when they're traveling with the safari operator? What extras do they give you? Do they help you with your tourist visas? Do they offer some type of traveler's insurance when you go? And what kind of accommodations and safari camps and lodges do they offer? So these are the kinds of things you really need to look for. It's a good idea to ask if they have a tour operator license in at least one country in Africa. They don't need one in every country because all of their tour guides should be licensed. That's another quick pearl of wisdom, is to make sure that your safari guide is a licensed guide and not just a driver who's picked up the trade from somebody else. You can ask these questions of your safari operators. Do they have a tour operator license? Do their safari guides have safari guide licenses? Very, very important. You can even ask in advance who is going to be your safari guide, and they should be comfortable with you communicating with them so you can kind of get to know him before. But these are some basic things that you should ask and be aware of when you decide who is going to help you on your safari and what tour operator you're going to choose. This brings us to the final segment of this episode, and that's pro tips and pearls of wisdom. What are the 3 or 4 things that I recommend everybody do once they've decided who they're going to go on a safari with, where they're going to go on safari, and when, and the other items that we've talked about? Number 1, book early. A safari experience, to get the best choices of lodges, camps, and companies, you need to book early, about a year in advance or more. If you wait till 6 months before you go, you can probably still get some good options, but most people who take their safari as one of the best experiences they're ever going to have book early. Many lodges and camps only might have 10 to 12 rooms or tents, so they do fill up early. Rule number 2, arrive early. Remember, when you're coming from a foreign country, usually you're going to arrive in the evening. Most flights from Europe, from the US, arrive in the evening. So the good news is you do get to sleep before your safari, but you're going to be jet lagged. I always recommend 2 nights in your arrival city before your safari begins. That gives you 1 complete and full day to either take in the sights and some local tours where you're going to be, but it more importantly gives your body and mind a chance to adjust a little bit more before you set out on that safari trail. And the 3rd rule I recommend is, if you're wondering how long you should go, err on the side of longer and not shorter. After all, I hear all the time from people, I wish I would have booked a few extra days, but I've never heard from somebody that their safari was too long. Those are the 3 pearls of wisdom and pro tips I hope you'll take into consideration when you're figuring the what, where, when, and who when it comes time to book your Africa safari. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you found this episode beneficial. Questions and comments section of the episode. If you're watching me on YouTube, give me a question or a comment. Give me a like. If you're watching us on social media, comment. What did you like about this episode? What do you want me to talk more about? Because I read those comments and questions because they help shape our future episodes. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time on Africa Revealed with Dr. Matt Jensen. Take care now.
Thanks for listening to Africa Revealed. Join us again next week as we uncover more of the wildlife, wonder, and stories that make Africa unforgettable. Until then, adventure awaits.